Hi, I'm Rob.
And I'm Rob.
And welcome to the Help Me, I'm Middle-Aged podcast.
Where you can find fun, exciting things about being middle-aged.
Oh, you're going to find things about us and about yourself you never thought you knew.
Hold on, come along for the ride. It's going to be fun.
Welcome to the Help Me, I'm Middle-Aged podcast. My name is Rob.
And I'm Rob, too.
And our guest today is Steve Kerns. How are you, sir?
Very good, thanks.
Okay. And your current title is head of, could you give us
It's the
office?
director of the Office of the Diaconate for the Diocese of Metuchen.
Absolutely.
Right.
But before we go there, we noticed on your resume that you went to Notre Dame.
Yes.
And we Googled the years. Were you there with Rudy from the movie?
Actually, the Rudy game that's in the movie happened the year after I graduated. Oh. But my wife, who's a year behind me, was still going to St. Mary's, and she was at that game.
Wow.
In fact, I came out to visit her. I was at that game also.
Oh, you actually were there?
You were there.
I was in law school at the time, but we were there.
Oh, very cool.
So you seen him carry him off the field?
And we're like, what are they doing? We had no idea. We didn't know any of the backstory. We didn't know any of the backstory. So
Oh my God!
we're just cheering, whatever.
That's a great story, though. Who could say that?
Yeah.
You know. Well, you have a very interesting life. So you're originally from the Bergen County area.
Yes, grew up originally in Paramus.
Bergen County, New Jersey.
Yep.
Paramus, New Jersey.
Yep.
The capital of the malls.
Capital of malls. Once the first one went in, my father decided it was too crowded, so we moved west to the farms of Franklin Lakes, which is no longer farms.
Yeah.
Right.
And went to high school at St. Joe's Regional in Montvale, not St. Joe's in Metuchen here,
Right.
but up in Montvale. And went to college at Notre Dame, law school at Villanova.
So was it as tough like to get into Notre Dame back then? Was the school have the same?
It had a reputation, but I don't think it was as hard as it is now. I was just looking at some admission numbers the other day because I'm doing a recommendation for an in-law, and it's just I think it's even tougher now.
Yeah.
Like a lot of colleges, it's getting more difficult.
It's just the admission rates are so low. So many people are applying.
Yeah.
Thousands of people applying.
And then Villanova, good school.
Yeah, that was good. It's literally across the tracks from the undergraduate school on the other side of the railroad track. So it's kind of its own little universe, the law school. But it was a good school, and I enjoyed being outside Philly. And my wife, for her last 2 years, getting her master's, she needed to work in a hospital. So she got a job at Albert Einstein Medical Center north of Philly. So we were, after being apart 700 miles for a year or two, we were back together again. So
That was awesome. That's good.
before we were married.
Way the stars line up sometimes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And then you started your law degree. Law work.
Yeah, I clerked for a judge up in Hackensack. Our first year we got married, moved to Edison, and then had a job for just about a year with a small firm, and then got the job with the Port Authority Law Department, which appealed to me because of all their involvement in transportation and stuff, which has
It's massive.
always been a big.
Most people don't
draw
even
for me.
realize how much the Port Authority actually have their fingers into. Land,
No, it's
ports, trains, airports. The amount of legal work must be insane.
It's amazing. We did the legal department did just about everything except divorces and estates. Just about everything else you can think
I'm
of.
surprised it wasn't part of the benefit package at the Port Authority.
That's part of what appealed to me too. It was a very broad field. Lots of stuff going on.
And you were in Edison at that time?
Yeah.
You made it there?
Lived in Edison. We moved to Flemington 30 years ago last week, actually.
Okay. All right.
30 years ago last week.
It was a little more of a commute.
Yeah.
Yeah, we knew, we knew the downside to moving west was going to be the commute, and we figured I'm the one that was going to take that on, not my wife so much.
Right.
So that was the price we paid. And then after 9/11, the commute became even worse for the next 13 years.
Yeah.
Right.
That's all right.
So you were there on 9/11. This day is like seared in, I think, our generation's minds.
Yeah, and this being the 20th anniversary.
It just passed.
But you were also there during 93, too. So how long were you working in the Trade Center?
I started with the Port Authority in November of 1981, I think.
Okay.
81. And at that point, the Trade Center had only been officially open for 8 years.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the guys in our engineering department and legal department had worked on building the towers. They were still there. So yeah, I started with them in 81, and then I've been an intended murder victim twice.
Yeah.
Once was in the bombing of February 26, 1993, and then 8.5 years later for 9/11.
Right. What was the 93 one like for you?
I was on the 68th floor. The Port Authority headquarters were in the North Tower. One World Trade is the address. And I was in my office on the 68th floor. I was on the phone with somebody, and suddenly all the lights went out. The phone went dead. And
Did it shake? Did you feel?
not too much. Now, just as background, if you recall, the bomb was parked in the basement,
Right.
two levels below ground,
Yeah.
in a van. So on the 68th floor, we heard a bang, but we didn't feel a lot of shaking, not like 9/11.
Yeah.
But the next day, I walked out in the hall to find out what was going on. And when I looked down the hall, already smoke was coming out of the elevators because of the chimney effect.
Right.
Right.
The bomb under the basement, smoke just poured right up the building right away. And then, yelled to everybody, "Let's get out of here. We need to evacuate." I don't know what the problem is, but it's not good.
Right.
And it took 3.5 hours to get out of the building.
Really?
Wow.
Yeah, it was a very long evacuation. And the second part of it, the first part was we had lights in the stairwell, and it was very hazy, very smoky. We got off on the 43rd floor, which is where the Port Authority cafeteria was, and hung out there for a while. There were a lot of people there. Conditions were a little bit better than in the stairwell, so we waited there for the fire department to come up. When they finally did and said we could go the rest of the way down, they also instructed the Port Authority to turn off any emergency lighting that they had. I think at the time they weren't sure what had happened yet, and they were wondering if there was a transformer explosion for Con Ed or whatever.
And no one's imagining what really happened.
Something. Yeah, well, except the guys that are down there. So the rest of the trip, the last 43 stories, was in pitch black.
Just like this.
Can't believe that happened. When I said,
I know, right? That's crazy, right?
It's a motion sensor.
I'll tell you. Go ahead.
So,
so we were in pitch black the rest of the way down, and there's no windows in the stairwell, so it's just like, what a blind person must deal with.
yeah.
Wow. Wow. Well, when you finally got out and your people out, it must have been mayhem on the street, right? Just people. I'm sure people are falling. Everyone's nervous. I mean, it's got to be, horrible.
There was a lot of panic in the stairwell, and because there were a lot of times when we weren't moving, which was the worst thing actually. There were a lot of times when it was so crowded and the conditions were such that we were just, standing there.
Right.
So it's better if you're moving and your adrenaline is going. And
right. At least
whatever.
you're purposeful in your actions.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Is the North Tower more important than the South Tower?
Oh, to me it was.
Well, of course, yeah.
It was the Port Authority headquarters, but no, they're pretty much equal. I mean, one had a restaurant at the top, the other had the observation deck.
Windows on the world.
Yeah.
Right, and the cellar in the sky, the big wine cellar up there.
Interesting.
Yeah, and then the other one had the observation deck, which was kind of unique too, because unlike most tall buildings, almost every building that's really tall like that has an observation deck, but this one you could actually go outside.
Yeah,
This actually had a platform on the roof, set back obviously from the edge, and
I was up there. It was pretty cool.
yeah, it's very cool. In fact, before I even worked there, we went there just as tourists. And
Right.
I joke with my older daughter that she had her diaper changed at 1,378 feet.
Quarter mile in the sky.
68 feet, right. So, yeah, it was very cool.
Wow.
But once we got down to the bottom, just to finish your question, Rob, the chaos didn't begin right away. In the wintertime, the plaza between the two buildings frequently had ice on it, and they closed it, so you couldn't walk. Well, that's the way we got out of the building. We had to walk down across the plaza. And on Church Street, which at that point is about a block away, you just saw wall-to-wall ambulances and police vehicles and lights swirling and all that. So it was kind of surreal because you came down out of the building. It's all very quiet. There's just people walking across the plaza.
Yeah.
And then in the distance, there's all this chaos and people waiting and
Trying to figure out what's going on.
for services, yeah.
Oh, and 6 people, was it 6 people died?
6 adults, one of whom was 7 months pregnant.
Oh, Jesus.
Monica Smith, four of those were Port Authority employees having their lunch down in the basement area.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Yes.
And Monica was 7 months. And the tragic thing about that was it happened on a Friday, and it was Monica's last day of work before maternity leave. So, yeah, it was a shame.
Wow. Yeah, that's...
And the property damage was just unbelievable. My job at the time was head of the claims department.
Oh, wow.
So talk about job security.
Yeah.
And I think I totaled 1,500 cars that were in the basement.
Wow.
So, and the pictures from that day are amazing. They built 6 stories below ground when they dug what we jokingly called the World Trade Center basement. 6 stories below ground, so the bomb, collapsed everything down to the bottom and blew up 3 stories up above ground into the hotel that connected the 2 towers. And I got to see a week later to the minute. Actually, I got to see it. I was down there with my hard hat and everything, and temporary lighting. It's hard to describe. The devastation was enormous.
Is that, I know we're going to talk about it later, the museum that recently had been created for 9/11. Is that referenced in the museum, the 93 situation?
Yeah, it is. Not sure how much time they give it or space, but it is down there,
Okay.
And actually, ironically, that's where the museum is now. The museum is, even though there's a building above ground, the bulk of the museum is below ground in those 6 stories.
Wow. Interesting.
So then you start the rebuilding process. Life eventually gets back to normal.
That was an amazing story, too, actually. I don't know if we probably don't have time to go into it in detail, but 210-story buildings, every horizontal surface had a film of grease and soot on it. Everything horizontal in this office times 110 stories times 1 acre each floor.
Because of the explosion?
A layer of soot and grime on everything.
Really?
And so to get that place reopened was an amazing task. I didn't have anything directly to do with it, but we hired, something like 3,000 temporary employees.
Cleaning staff, right?
And cleaning supplies and all that stuff so that the governor could symbolically walk into his office in the Trade Center 3.5 weeks after the bombing. It was pretty amazing, actually.
Interesting. Wow. I never heard about that.
Yeah. So the mindset right from the get-go, in fact, people were meeting even before they went home. When you got down to the bottom, you tried to find somebody that you knew. And where was everybody? And the mindset was, hey, let's get this thing open again. We got to.
Right.
And so I mentioned that because on 9/11, the mindset was kind of similar.
Right.
Until the towers fell.
Right.
Nobody was expecting that.
Yeah. Now, did a heightened sense of security, could you really see that after the 93 attack up until 2001?
There were definite changes, and ironically, you might be able to make an argument that the death toll on 9/11 was not as horrible as it could have been because of things they did in the 8.5 years in between.
Right.
They added reflective tape on all the stairs. They put more lighting in, more communications. Now, a lot of that didn't work either by the nature of the flying bombs that hit the building. But enough of it did work. The evacuation was much, much quicker on 9/11.
That's good. Yeah.
I got down in 50 minutes as opposed to 3.5 hours.
Wow.
So, they did do that. And then there were more subtle things, like suddenly after the bombing, you couldn't find trash cans in the Trade Center anymore. So it's like you buy coffee on the way into work, you got no place to put the cup until you got to your office.
Because that could be a receptacle for a bomb or something.
Exactly. The idea was you could put, and most of Lower Manhattan, they got rid of receptacles for a few years too, as I recall.
Wow.
So little things like that.
Interesting.
So then it happens again. I mean, it must have been like surreal. Like this is like not happening again. Like what was that? What was the morning like?
Yeah, I was gonna say, do you remember leaving your house thinking like, what's today going to be?
No, but I remember what my almost last conversation with my wife was, because excuse me, on the way to the train station in White House, I heard on the news that Bishop Breen, our bishop at the time, had resigned because of wait a minute. He either resigned or he died. He had Alzheimer's, so
Gotcha.
he resigned at one point. Whichever that was, I remember calling her on my cell phone and saying, or my mobile phone.
The mobile.
That's what we had back then, right? It only did one thing.
Yep, exactly.
Carried it behind you.
Made phone calls. So I remember calling her and telling her, hey, you should hear in the news about Bishop Breen. And that was I remember that was almost my last conversation with her.
Mm-hmm.
And then other than that, it was a typical, normal morning.
Right.
The one not normal thing was the gorgeous sky.
It was just crisp.
It's unbelievable. Blue.
Crisp blue.
So, yeah, we got in. I got into my office. This time I'm on the 62nd floor.
Mm-hmm.
Of the 13 people who worked for me in claims, 10 of them were or 9 others, me and 9 others, they were in the office at 8:46. And I had just left my office and was going to travel down to the elevator to go down to 44 and get coffee. And while I was walking, there was a loud bang, and the building started shaking violently. So violently that a couple of my coworkers lost their footing.
Wow.
And fell to their knees. So the shaking seemed to go for a good 20 seconds or maybe 30 seconds. And again, kind of a lesson learned from the bombing 8.5 years earlier. I yelled to everybody, get out into the hallway. Had no idea what happened, but if the building's shaking like that,
something's going on.
Yeah, it can't be good.
So you're at the 62nd where you work. You're now at 44?
No, I hadn't gotten the 44 yet.
And where did the plane hit?
The North Tower, I think, was around 90.
Okay.
91,
So
something
good
like
20
that.
plus floors above where you were.
Yeah, a little more than that.
Yeah.
I actually had a meeting that morning at 9:30 scheduled on 74, so I would have been closer. I yelled at everybody to get out into the hallway and go down the nearest staircase. There's 3 staircases in each tower that go from top to bottom.
Mm-hmm. They're continuous all the way through?
Yeah.
Okay.
And, well, at some floors there's like a longer platform, but yeah, they go from top to bottom pretty much. So I stood at the entrance to the door. I knew from 1993 that we would not be able to stay together as a group. 10 people all together wasn't going to work because there's already,
everybody's coming down.
Hundreds of people pouring into the stairwell.
Right.
2 or 3 people could stay together, but I didn't think 10 was going to do it. So I decided to stand at the doorway and count and make sure that the 9 people went down before me, figuring if this was serious, which it seemed to be, and if I made it out, if I saw them all go down the stairs, then I could assume that they went out. So I was doing that for a few minutes. There's a lot of confusion. Some people came out of the stairwell they forgot something at their office. They wanted to bring with them or bring home or whatever. So after a few minutes, I'm thinking, well, it's probably a good idea if I go down.
Right.
But I wasn't sure in the confusion if all 9 of them had gotten in the stairwell. I knew I'd seen at least 8.
Those are direct reports? Those people report into you?
No, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I was the chief of the division, so these were all people, claims adjusters and secretaries. Now they'd be called administrative assistants, but back then they were secretaries. So I wasn't sure. I knew I'd seen at least 8. So I said, you know what, I better go in and check the offices and the cubicles and the file room and the conference room before I go down. So I did that. And I was about halfway through the offices when I went into my secretary's office. And I walked into the office and looked around. And this is one of the images that's kind of burned in my brain, is when our eyes met, because not only hadn't she left, she was on her knees under her desk. And I'll never forget the look on her face. She looked at me and had eyes as big as saucers and said, "It's an earthquake." I said, "Rose, look outside your window. What do you see? There's hunks of metal and wreckage and concrete and glass coming down from somewhere above us. So I don't know what happened, but something happened above us. It's not an earthquake." And not only that, I don't think it's that important what happened at this point. I think the important thing is we got to get out of here. So I grabbed her hand, and she came out and decided that was probably the best thing to do. So she went down. The trip down, like I said, was much quicker than 93. I have to remind people we didn't have smartphones then, so they're like, well, how come you didn't know what was going on? Well, we didn't have smartphones. We had mobile phones that only made calls. We did have little texture devices.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, I'm not in front of the mic, sorry. Little texture devices you wore in your belt that got yellow text messages.
Yeah.
You guys might be too young to remember that.
Airball. There was. Yeah. I remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the problem was they weren't in real time, so everything was delayed.
Right.
So we're going down the stairs. About 15 minutes into the trip, somebody gets a text message that a plane hit the building. And the reaction in the stairwell is kind of puzzlement. Like, well, that's weird. How do you miss something that big?
Right.
You know, I mean,
Yeah.
that's odd, some kind of weird, crazy accident. In real time, 17 minutes after we were hit, the other plane
Hit the
went down the Hudson, took a U-turn at the Statue of Liberty, came back and hit the South Tower.
Did you feel it in your building?
We didn't hear it, which mystifies me to this day because the towers are not that far apart, really.
Right.
And where did that hit?
That also hit up.
It came up the Hudson, right?
No, I mean
No, he
like,
means
what
in the building.
Oh,
I think that was the high 80s. I'm not 100% sure.
Okay.
But it went in differently. Didn't go in. The plane that went into our building went pretty much straight.
Yeah.
The plane on the other side kind of clipped the corner a little bit, which is why that tower went down first,
Right.
even though it was hit second. In any event, we didn't hear it. And I was in the stairwell closest to the South Tower, too, which is doubly mystifying to me. Here again, it's like 10, 15 minutes later, somebody gets a text message that a plane hit the other building. Now, the reaction in the stairwell is very different.
Yeah.
Now you could hear people audibly gasp. Some people started crying.
Did they stop going down ever? Or, I mean, did people...
Well, there was delays here and there. It's not like you were racing down the stairs. There were too many people for that to happen. But it wasn't like 93 where you were stopped for 5 and 10 minutes at a time, not moving. It was moving just slowly.
Right.
We got down to the 20th floor and things did slow down there because the stairwells were only wide enough at that time for 2 people. Okay. And at the 20th floor, we saw our first firefighter going up as we were going down. So now, the rest of the trip, we had to go single file because Port Authority police and firefighters were coming up the other side trying to get people out of the building.
Wow.
Finally get down to the plaza. I don't know if you can see this. Whoops.
Oh, cool.
That's a picture of the way it looked on 9/11 before 9/11, before the bomb, the attacks. The building in the middle is the hotel. Right. The
Marriott?
North Tower, it was a Marriott then. In 93, it was a Vista. The North Tower.
Can we make a shot of this? Put it up?
I'll get it after. And
Okay. The North Tower, where I was, is on the right in this picture. South Tower on the left. The plaza in the middle, in fact, this sphere that you see in the middle of the fountain is still on display at Liberty Park with all the damage it sustained. Wow. I show people this picture because it's the only picture I have to show you what happened next. When I got down to the bottom floor and looked out, of course, this didn't look anything like this. It looked like what one of our other docents at the Tribute Museum calls a war zone, and he was a Vietnam vet, so he would know what he's talking about. It was just, smokes and fires and bodies and glass and concrete and airplane wreckage, and it was just horrible. Wow. Rather than leave, I decided to go to our police headquarters. Again, Port Authority has its own police force that patrolled the buildings. And again, remember, there's 6 levels below this.
Right.
Well, the first level at that time was almost entirely a shopping mall. It was a huge shopping mall, 1 level below ground. So our police headquarters was there, and it was right about where my finger is, right on the edge of the fountain, 1 level below ground. So that's where I went next to see if I could help or find out what's going on.
I just watched a movie about 9/11 with Nicolas Cage. Have you ever seen that one?
I haven't seen it yet, but I know about it. He's one of our police officers.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I thought it was a real interesting another angle from it.
Yeah, and I have the soundtrack to it. I love the music from that
It
movie.
is good. Yeah.
But I haven't watched it yet.
Okay.
It's a little. Sometimes it hits a little home. Too close.
Yeah,
Too
I
close
haven't.
to home.
I haven't been able to watch it. I have it, but I
Yeah.
haven't watched it yet.
Yeah.
So that's what I did. I went down to the police headquarters and 1 level below ground, and I was there for about 10 minutes. There were only about 5 cops with me. Most of them were in the building trying to get people out, but there's a skeleton crew there with me. Mm-hmm. And I had a guy with me from Port Authority too. And then at 9:59, I was just about 10 minutes after I got there. Suddenly, there was this loud roar, which is very difficult to describe, but it's kind of like rolling thunder times 20. And even though we were underground, where we were was shaking. It was an office with ceiling tiles. They started falling on us. We ran from the back of the police headquarters to the doorway, but it was blocked by debris. So we did what my secretary did an hour and a quarter earlier. We all dove under desks or got under door frames, hoping that was going to protect us from whatever this was. We had no idea what it was, but what it was the South Tower coming down, really above my head when you get right down to it. So this time, when the shaking stopped, the most immediate effect was smoke. I mean, I could see maybe from me to the doorway, probably not even that far. So I was talking about seeing, and the light went out again.
Ominous.
So we had a couple of advantages being in the police area. One of the cops got a huge axe, which they used to pry open the door so he could get out. There was a water cooler there, and your first reaction to that is, why the heck would that be important? Again, a lesson learned from '93, from the bombing. With all that smoke in the air, if you think of what's in the air when a 110-story building collapses, you had, pulverized concrete and pulverized glass and asbestos and silicone, all kinds of things that aren't good for human lungs.
Sure.
So in the bombing in '93, while we were at the employee cafeteria, we all grabbed ice from the salad bar and put it into a handkerchief or a T-shirt or whatever and put it up in front of your mouth so you had a crude filter. So I said to the guys, before we leave, we should do the same thing.
Smart.
So we did that. Got out into the hallway, used the axe to get into the Borders bookstore, if you remember Borders, at the northeast corner of the site, and finally got out to the street. And I started walking northeast towards City Hall, and I went 2 blocks before I could see the sky.
Yeah, because the South Tower had fallen.
I was in the middle of this debris cloud.
Sure.
When I could see the sky, I turned around, and I could see my tower standing with giant holes, a giant multi-story hole in it with smoke and flames pouring out of it. And I looked to my left, which is where the South Tower shouldn't have been, and I just saw empty sky. And so for the first time, I realized what happened.
It doesn't even compute in your mind at that point, right?
Yeah, no, it's like, well, and now my focus totally changes. Now I have to find a phone.
Okay.
I got to call my wife. I got to let her know I'm alive. And that wasn't easy because most of the public phones weren't working, and if you had a mobile phone, most of those weren't working either. And I had left mine in my office, so it didn't matter anyway. So I started looking for a phone, and I started walking northwest, and at 10:28, I was at a point 6 blocks north of the site, and I heard that horrible roar again. And this time, even though there were buildings between me and the site, this time I knew what that meant. Yeah. This was my tower, the North Tower, coming down. So I ran to the nearest cross street and looked south. I saw the end of it coming down. And then another weird sight that's kind of burned into my brain is the sight of hundreds of people running as fast as they could toward me from my perspective. But I'm sure it was this way all the way around the site. Yeah. Running as fast as they could, being chased by this multi-story cloud that, because of the canyon effect in New York, was being pushed in between the buildings, so it looked like it was alive, like it was after these people, like some kind of weird monster movie. Wow. Very, very weird sight.
Yeah, that's scary.
Finally found a phone at the subway station at Canal Street, which, of course, all the subway stations were abandoned at that point. Found a phone at work down in the station. This is now about 11:35, so it's 10 minutes short of 3 hours.
Your poor wife has got to be like, oh my God.
Yeah, she has her own story to tell that day.
Sure.
She was supposed to teach over at Our Lady of Peace in Ford's, and a coworker drove her back to pick up the kids at Immaculate Conception in Somerville and Immaculata High School. They got home. My oldest daughter wanted to tell it. We had a landline. We had one mobile phone, so my oldest daughter took one. My wife took the other. the phone machine was totally full of messages. It was like everybody I'd ever met in my life, I guess, was calling. Sure. And my wife kept answering the phone and saying, I haven't heard from him, and I really can't talk to you. I need to keep this line open. In fact, she jokes that when I finally got through, she almost hung up on me. At least I think she's joking. So yeah, that's in a nutshell how she spent her morning. But finally at 11:35 we connected. And even 20 years later, it's hard to talk about that phone call without getting very emotional. But I do remember in typical stupid fashion, I started off when she answered the phone. I said, I think I ruined another suit at work today. She said, I'll buy you two. Yeah. So, and then the rest of the day was, like a bad movie, Escape from Manhattan, that movie that was out back
Escape from New York,
trying to get out of the island. Because the only public transportation that was working was going north, which doesn't help when you live in Flemington. So.
No.
What time did you eventually get back home?
Well, that's another odd thing. I walked up to a law firm that we did business with at 42nd Street, right by Grand Central Station, cleaned up a little bit, and they had a television. Mm-hmm. And found out that some trains were starting to leave west from Penn Station. So I walked over there, got on one of the first trains west off the island. Mm-hmm. And oddly enough, I got home at White House the exact same time I would have.
Really?
If it had been a normal work day. I pulled in at about 7 o'clock.
Wow.
And instead of going right, my wife picked me up. My car keys were in my office, so just, I had no wallet. I had nothing. Yeah. But rather than go home right away, Father Tim Christie was saying a special mass at church for the missing, the dead, and those we didn't know about. So we went there first and then went home. Yes. Yeah, I sat in the back because I looked rather conspicuous.
Right. So. Wow.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, that's quite a day.
So this day changes your life like no other day, because you still have trauma over it. Of course, you can still feel it when you tell the story.
Well, some parts, yeah. I mean, I've told the story a lot because I'm a docent for not the National Museum, but the Tribute Museum, which is 3 blocks south on Greenwich. The Tribute Museum is a much smaller museum started by families who lost loved ones. In fact, the main guy was a firefighter who lost his son, who was also a firefighter that day. So the unique thing about the Tribute Museum is that all the docents, tour guides, all have a connection. They all have a story.
Right.
And they either lost a loved one, they're a survivor, such as myself, or they're a first responder. And they weave their story through the tours of the memorial that we do. Wow. So that's what makes it a little different. So I've told the story, hundreds of times, but it's funny over 20 years. And I don't want it to ever become rote like it didn't happen to me. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Right. But on the other hand, there are certain points where it gets you again, where it hasn't for a long time. So like when my first grandchild was born 5 years ago, I'd give the tour and I'd be getting emotional at a certain point when I'd be thinking how I almost didn't see her. Yeah. And that I was blessed to see her and be here for that. So it's funny, over the years, different things hit you occasionally, and even though you've talked about it hundreds and hundreds of times, you can still focus in on it.
I don't know about other people, but for my generation, I think if there's a crisp day in early September, it's just eerie. It's just eerie. You just something about those crisp days in early September.
Yeah, it can be a beautiful day, but something
if
can
it's
happen.
early September and you got that first little chill in the air and they're in a cloud in the sky, your mind just goes right back.
Yeah, mine goes back to, and when I hear helicopters, for some reason, that brings me back. Right. Because that was a big thing after the hits. There were helicopters everywhere.
Yeah.
Well, I know my wife was bringing my son, who was born 1 month prior to that, back from his first month's checkup. And the big question is, what have we brought our kid into the world? What this is like going forward? So, yeah, it makes you think. But, that's a tremendous experience you had. And did all of your coworkers, did you know a lot of people who did not make it out?
Yeah. the Port Authority lost 84 people, 37 cops, and the rest civilians. We lost 4 people from our department, but I thank God none of the 9 who were in my division, they all made it out. I thank God for that. And even Rose, although she had a very difficult time dealing with the aftermath, she was terribly traumatized, needed a lot of therapy and stuff. But to her credit, she came back to work about a year later and worked for a few more years and then retired, and she's living a good life down in North Carolina now. She calls me every 9/11.
Nice.
But, people's reactions, to your point, Rob, very different, depends on the person. So you had Rose, just as an example, those 10 people, myself and the 9 who were under my charge, you had Rose at one extreme, and at the other extreme, we met for the first time 3 days later on, the 14th, Friday the 14th, in unfinished office space in Newark that the Port Authority owned. And, when we first met, there was a lot of hugging and tears and tears of joy that people were there and tears of sorrow that there were people that weren't there who we knew had died at this point. And when that was all done, one of the other women who worked for me said, okay, you're giving me a salary, give me something to do. I'm here to work. So we had that, two extremes and everything in between.
Right, at the end of the day, you had to figure out how do we keep going.
Right. I mean, we make jokes. I always wanted to clean my office, but that's not really the way I wanted to do it.
Right.
But we had nothing.
Yeah.
We had nothing.
All files are gone, computers are gone.
Even back then, paper was king.
Sure.
So.
Right. You're just in an old office space now, right?
There was no cloud to store stuff, so
right.
There was something backed up down in Philadelphia somewhere because the Port Authority was able to make their payroll on time, which they were very proud of. So there was a little bit of backup stuff. I mean, we had computers back then, but still not like what we have now.
Wow.
So then you start moving forward. You start Did you ever go back to the new building, or did you always work in a different space? Once the new building went up. Yeah,
we were nomads in my opinion for 13 years.
Oh.
And then it took a long time before they started building down at the site again. Then they built the new One World Trade,
right,
which is right next to where the North Tower was. And the commissioners of the Port Authority decided, now this is going back probably about 10 years, maybe more than that. The commissioners decided that the Port Authority would not move into One World Trade.
Oh, okay.
That it would be too traumatic for some of the employees who were still there.
That makes sense.
Yeah, no, and I can tell you right now that if they had moved back into One World Trade, I would not have been there. Not because of me, but my wife
would not.
Yeah.
She's like, there's no way.
You got to wait twice, you ain't got to wait 3 times.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's
right, exactly. That's not happening again. In fact, we used to have, after 9/11, we had evacuation drills for wherever we were. But for most of that 13 years, we were up at Park Avenue by Union Square. And the other tenants are looking at us like we were crazy, but after what we've been through, we took them very seriously. So
right.
Got out the building, went down to the park 3 blocks away. We had our little bags that had a bottle of water and a transistor radio and a mask, which is ironic.
Right.
Everybody's wearing those now. And I tell my wife when we got back, when we had our evacuation drill today, she said, "Oh, that's nice. Did they give you a rubber dinghy and a paddle?" I said, "No." She said, "Then I'm not impressed." When they give you a rubber dinghy and a paddle,
you can get off the island.
Yeah. So eventually, and I was pleased that it was 14 months before I retired, we moved back down to the Trade Center site. We moved into the little building of 72 stories for World Trade. And my office was on the west side overlooking the memorial pools. So I really felt like I had kind of come full circle.
Sure.
So that you're a very strong man of faith, right?
I try to be.
Did this move you closer to that? Like you then, I don't know at what point you became a deacon. Was that like a pivotal
Yeah,
How
so
did
that's
that
something always in your
affect your
past you were
life?
gonna
Like, do you think you would have been a deacon without this?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've been asked that before. A lot of people assume that that's why I became a deacon.
Right.
I was ordained 11 and a half years ago and entered formation 5 years before that. So 2005, I entered into formation. It takes 5 years to become a deacon. I'd be lying if I didn't say I had been thinking about it before 9/11.
Right.
So there was something nagging me, calling or whatever, to be more involved in the church, to get a deeper level of intensity. But there's no doubt that 9/11 crystallized whatever I'd been thinking of, especially the aftermath, which is where I end my tours, because it's possibly one of the very few positive things that you could say about 9/11 is the outpouring of compassion that happened afterwards. And I think specifically of the 9 months that it took to restore the site. You know, from the very beginning, there were just tons and tons of people. You couldn't have enough people there. In fact, they had too many people.
You mean helping with the cleanup?
Helping with everything. Even that day when I got off the train at White House, the White House Rescue Squad, they were looking for people to come off the train who had been there. Like, they wanted to help.
Right.
They saw me. They're like, "Oh, we'll take you to the hospital. We got to get you to the hospital." I said, "No, please. I appreciate what you want to do. I really do. But I need my family before I need anything else, and I'm not hurt physically."
Right.
So, and in the 9 months after that, over 500,000 people, over 500,000 people volunteered at the site.
Wow.
From every state in this country and 70 countries around the world. You have people from 70 countries around the world volunteering.
Yeah.
And their efforts range from just, handing out water bottles to people to working on the pile where fires burned for 4 months straight, endangering their lives, which many of them have paid the price for that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
horrible.
I know someone too who did.
Yeah, with horrible respiratory diseases. For people they didn't know. And families they would never meet. So
The finest hour for your fellow citizens to come together.
yeah, when we were kids, I had 3 younger siblings, and if we had a day when everybody was getting along and there were no fights, I can remember my father'd say, "How are everything today at the house?" "Oh, great." He said, "They were all good. I wish I could bottle it." Well, that's what I wish about those 9 months.
Right.
I wish we could bottle that, because it was just such an example of service, which is what diaconia, which is where the word deacon comes from, is all about service. And so it was very inspiring to me.
Yeah.
To see you all.
They say, we need another 9/12.
Yeah,
You know what I
right.
mean? We need to revert back to the way we were
Right.
after that, because that's where humanity, you really have faith in what
Yeah.
humanity can do for good. So
Yep.
Totally. So now when you, I remember going to the 9/11 museum, and I didn't go for a long time. And me and my wife went. We were with another couple. They were from out of town, and they wanted to see it. So we took them into the city. Did the whole hosting thing.
They have my shoes, by the way.
Oh, they do.
Oh, really?
They're not on display at the moment, but they have my shoes.
I had to get to it. I mean, I got to it really quick. I just felt the amount of sad, like depression, like it just brought me back to that day. You know what I mean? Like I remember pulling over on 16W by the old Giant Stadium. And from there, you can look right across the meadows. And there were cars just parked everywhere. Like people just getting up on their hoods. They were just looking because it was a direct shot. You can see the fire. But it was such a sad day. And I just couldn't. I remember I always used to listen to 88 WCBS AM 88. And I was listening that morning. And then when you go down there, that's one of them, and 1010 Wins is one of the radio stations you can listen. You can listen to the live feed from that morning.
Oh, really?
It's just so sad. I was like, I gotta get out. I just went through very quickly, and I waited for everyone to come out. But when you're working at the museum, like you're not really having that separation. Like you're trying to share your story to educate people,
Right.
But it's also, is it like a constant emotional experience? How often are you
Or
there?
is it cathartic to be able to?
Well,
Like free therapy, or is
yeah,
it?
I didn't start doing tours until about. Well, I decided to do this to honor I wanted to do something on the 10th anniversary of 9/11, so that's when I got involved with the tours. And I don't do them again at the National Museum,
right.
the big one that you went to. I work out of the Tribute Center. But it's the same principle. Your question's the same. By 10 years after, it really wasn't cathartic, even though I hadn't been giving tours. I told it, again, it's like my coworkers. Everybody reacts differently. So some people don't want to talk about it ever. They don't want to see reminders of it, whatever. There's other people. I belong to a Facebook page of people that are interested in the Trade Center and show old pictures of before 9/11, all that. And it's interesting to me, but some of those people are like living in the past. It's like it's like an obsession with them. We should have built them exactly the same way, and you can just tell by their comments. They're like so emotional about it.
Yeah.
You just can't live like that all the time.
Right.
You have to move forward. And again, I apparently there's a reason why I'm still here. So get going on that reason, whatever it is.
But the value, like I saw some of the specials. I was watching Netflix, and you're on a special on Netflix, and I think to myself, there will be future generations, okay, who will forget. Same reason why most people forget about big holidays, Veterans Day, Memorial Day, and there'll be someone somewhere in the future who will listen to your story, and they will be touched by it, and you can't forget the past, or you're doomed to repeat it in the future, I guess. But so I think you do have a lot of value about telling your story.
Well, thank you. I think so, or I wouldn't be, spending all
here.
this time spend it here, or still going into the city, even though I'm retired, from the Port Authority. Education. I do the tours for two reasons. One is to commemorate my 84 colleagues, because I was, this close to being number 85. In fact, if I ever write a book in my life, it's going to be called
85,
almost number 85.
It's a really good idea.
And the second reason is education. And, now 20 years later, we get school groups. None of them were born.
Right.
And I think, and I tell people at the museum this too, use us while you got us, because we've got a determined shelf life.
Yeah.
And it's like the Pearl Harbor Museum. I'm sure there's nobody there anymore giving tours who was alive at the time, unless they were babies and they weren't, aware of what was going on. So use us while you got us. It's an opportunity to hear something that's not, dry black and white on a page, or even the TV, which is not black and white, and it's horrific to watch. But it's still, I've heard many people say it looked like a movie. It looks like a special effects movie. We're so jaded these days with all the...
It's true.
So when you hear a personal story, it fleshes it out. It really brings some meaning to it. The tours we give are pretty much 50-50, made up of tourists from our country and tourists from international, overseas. And all the comments that you see on TripAdvisor and all those places, are all about how significant that was to hear somebody's story interwoven with the facts about what happened.
Well, I remember I was watching the HBO documentary for that, and then
The one Steve was in.
Yeah, not the Netflix one. This one, the first one, I think.
Yeah,
was.
what happened on 9/11? That's geared towards school children.
Yeah, and I was watching it, and then all of a sudden you're there, and I'm like, wait, that's the deacon at our church. But it was
that guy.
But it was just the interaction with the school children in that documentary that I know what you're talking about. It's a really good documentary to look at too.
It is, and that school was a wonderful example of how to teach children about 9/11. They had them doing art projects and all kinds of stuff. I'm only in it for 2 minutes out of a half an hour, but it's a really good documentary, I think, about how to tell kids about it.
Yeah, I was surprised to see you there, but that was really cool.
I
actually,
was wearing my usual clothing.
Exactly. That's right.
Not wearing vestments.
That's right.
So now it seems from the outside, correct me if I'm wrong, you sort of have a life of service. Like you dedicate a lot of time to the church, being in charge of all. What is the proper terminology when you're in charge of all the deacons?
I'm the director of the office of the diaconate.
Right. So you spend a lot of time basically figuring out ways to help others.
Yeah, I mean, that job for the diocese, a lot of that is administrative, but it's towards the goal of what you're You know, like we have 2 classes in formation right now. So my work with them is mostly administrative, but it's to get them to provide service to the people of this diocese. So that's the goal. My parish work is more directly involved with, you know, helping people on a one-to-one basis.
Right.
Yeah. So when people talk, when you're working on the parish level as a deacon, when people talk about loss, you can really relate. I mean, you've seen, you've felt a lot. You know, a lot of your coworkers. I mean, that's the, you know, you know what they feel.
Yeah, that's you bring up something that's interesting, because when I was in formation, one of the things I worried about that a deacon does frequently is wakes. And I remember in formation being very edgy about that, and worried about what am I going to say to people that have lost their wife, their husband, their mother, their father, their kid. I don't know what to say. My experience in 9/11 may have helped. I lost not just colleagues, I lost some friends. I think that helped, and I think eventually I came to realize that in those situations, your presence is way more important than anything you can say. Just don't say something stupid.
Right. Just be there.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's your ministry of presence, I call it. That's very important. So, yeah, I think it did help a little bit with dealing with those kind of situations. It's not the same kind of loss. There aren't many people who, you know, there were 2,749 people that died that day at the Trade Center. So it's a limited number of people, but loss in general, you can at least empathize in a different way.
Are you still in contact with a lot of those other 9 people?
A couple of them. Like I said, Rose usually calls on 9/11.
Right.
The woman who wanted to work right away, she just retired, so I occasionally see her. I don't see them very much anymore. One of them died about 5 years ago, not related to 9/11. Excuse me. And it was interesting to go to the wake. It was in Hoboken. He had 3 daughters, and they were adults. And I was telling him how sorry I was for the loss of their dad and whatnot. And they were, you know, they were sorrowful, but one of them told me, you know what, the way we look at it, we had 14 more years of him than we should have.
Wow.
That's a positive spin.
Yeah.
Really
It was very interesting. So most of them I don't keep in touch with, but like the Port Authority had a service at the memorial a couple of weeks after 9/11, the 20th anniversary, and a bunch of them were there. I saw them there.
Nice.
It was good, but not on a regular basis.
Right.
So now, so you retired in 2016,
16. Yeah.
And you don't seem like you started to retire yet.
Slow down.
He went from a paid position to a lot of unpaid
Did you
work.
talk to my wife? If we're in company and somebody says you're retired, she just rolls her eyes.
It's all relative to what retirement means.
Yeah.
I guess.
It was easier working for the Port Authority than taking care of the honey-do list.
You know, my poor wife, the honey-do list gets as much time as it did then.
Right.
It's not any better.
Right.
The position with the diocese is allegedly part-time, but it doesn't work out that way. And the parish, which is what a joyful thing, what I want to be more involved in, that takes up the rest. So, yeah, it's, you know, I thought without an hour and a half commute each way, wow, I've got 3 more hours a day to myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's been filled.
I'm like, did I read a book? Have I taken up golf? No, I'd like to do both those things.
Sure.
Not happening. Not happening.
But you're fulfilled, right?
I am.
Just from this conversation, this seems like you.
Well, I like to think I followed the path I was being called to. Who
Yes,
knows?
that's what it seems like. That's what it seems like.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
What do you got over there?
Oh, these are. I have a lot of stuff from 9/11. I have because of my position in the Port Authority, I was able to get a cross made out of steel, which is very nice to have that at home, but I wasn't going to lug that in here.
Right.
And I got a bunch of stuff, but these are all medals and things I've gotten. This little cross was made from some of the marble that was on the express elevators. And I just got a bunch of pins. This is a replica of the World Trade Center cross. I don't know if you remember this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The day after, on 9/12, workers found 2 beams attached to each other in the
Yeah, it
shape of
looked
a
like a
cross,
cross, yeah.
with a steel sheet over the corner of it, which kind of reminds you of the Deacon's Cross,
Right.
which has a
Right.
stole, Deacon's
Yes,
stole on
yeah.
it. So that is like
Interesting.
important to me. And yeah, and then I actually have, believe it or not, 2 pins from the '93 bombing, which are pretty rare.
Interesting. They
This
have
one.
a pin commemorating that?
Well, this pin, I had 2. If I can, they're both tiny. If I can find the other one. And I wore these pins every day to work for 2,749 days
Really?
in memory of the people that died.
Wow.
I had to wear a suit back then, or a tie, so I would wear it every day. This one was given
you.
to us, '93 bombing, by the Port Authority, so every employee got that. And you can see it's kind of like looking up from the bottom of the towers.
Wow.
And then this one was given to us, I don't remember the tenant's name, but a grateful tenant who was grateful for all the work that was put into opening up the building again.
Right.
Had like a reception for Port Authority workers, and they gave us these pins.
Wow.
So, anyway.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that was really cool. Oh, that was really good.
Wow.
It's
Speechless.
one of those podcasts. Like,
Yeah,
we just
it's
don't
just-
have a lot to say. It's
Yeah,
just,
it's just like-
like
I've probably been monopolizing
No,
it.
no,
no,
no.
no.
This
That's
is what
really
it's all about. We
fascinating.
wanted to hear the story, and it's an amazing story. And it's really just one that has a lot of emotion tied to it. And
I really hope like someone's scrolling through YouTube years from now, and they understand the importance of the day, because as time passes by, we tend to forget. Like we have no idea what it was like on Pearl Harbor Day.
Mm-hmm.
right.
We just
Yeah.
don't know
Yeah.
what the traumatization of the country. We know none of that.
Yeah, and the world's changed
and the-
dramatically.
The good
since-
part of that is that, the old saying, time heals all wounds.
Right.
Right.
But the danger is that you forget things you shouldn't forget, too.
Right.
Yeah.
And that you should learn from.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It's been a great
Podcast.
conversation.
Thanks. Well, I was very happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me. And,
Yeah.
if
Well, Rob-
anybody's, I don't know how long it'll be there, but that Netflix thing is called Turning Point. They take stuff off Netflix after a while, don't they?
Occasionally.
Yeah, sometimes
they
they
do.
come.
So-
Usually it's on for a while though, but definitely check it out. It's a really good
Turning
podcast.
Point.
Turning
That's
Point.
the name of it.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a 5-part documentary. The producers tell me I'm on parts 1 and 2.
Yeah, I saw it.
I've only seen 1 so
Okay.
far. But
Well, Rob, good.
Another great story.
Absolutely. Well, my name is Rob,
My name is Rob, too.
and this was the Help Me on Middle Age podcast. Please scroll, hit the subscribe button, thumbs up, share with friends and family. We can do more interesting conversations like this, and we'd like to thank Steve Kerns for coming out today.
my
Yes.
pleasure. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Steve.
Okay.
It was really good.
Take care. Bye-bye.
All right.